The meninges comes from the Latin word menix, meaning membrane, and it makes sense that they are a membrane. There are three types of meninges: the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. You only need to know the dura and the pia mater. Um, so this would be the dura mater. The dura mater in Greek means tough mother, and the pia mater means delicate mother. So again, this is the dura mater. It's really tough, and its job is to protect the brain. The pia mater, on the other hand, is very delicate and goes with the grooves and the sulci of the entire brain. Oh, frontal association, that's what I meant. That's what I forgot. But yes, so these are the indents are the sulci, the bumps are the gyri, and the pia mater goes with the grooves and the bumps throughout the brain. Cool? Cool. So I'll use this one. So we have the cerebral hemispheres, left and right. The cerebral hemispheres are split by the longitudinal fissure. The cortex is split from the cerebellum by the transverse fissure. Would be this. And I already went over sulci and gyri. The central sulcus, which separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, would be right here, and it goes from the it's the central sulcus because you can follow it from the center, from the longitudinal fissure, all the way to the side. Okay, you can't do that with any other sulcus in the brain. Again, the central sulcus separates the frontal and parietal. The frontal deals with this. By the way, the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex makes up 80% of your brain. The frontal lobe deals with executive functions like emotions and things like that. The higher functions that separate us from every other animal on Earth. That's because our frontal lobe is large and deals with executive functions like emotions and things like that, and consciousness and all that stuff. Cool. The parietal lobe sits behind the central sulcus, and that deals with receiving and interpreting sensory information. Behind the parietal lobe would be your occipital lobe, dealing with vision. And then on the side here would be your temporal lobe, dealing with learning, hearing, memory, things like that. Cool. Where do I want to go from here? White matter and gray matter. The cortex is made up of gray matter. The gray matter consists of the cell bodies. I kept saying soma for the neurons. That's the cell body, versus the axons, which make up white matter, like the corpus callosum is made up of white matter. That's the axons of the neurons versus the cell bodies. Cool. So, the corpus callosum, we're going to start with the corpus callosum. This right here is the corpus callosum. It connects the two hemispheres of the brain. They're actually not connected in too many places. The corpus callosum is definitely the largest place that they are connected. And again, that's white matter. Cool story. Albert Einstein had a really large corpus callosum. His brain size was normal, but his corpus callosum was huge. And if you think about it, the corpus callosum is constantly sending information from the left and right hemispheres. And if you have a huge corpus callosum, it's kind of like having a 10-lane highway versus a 2-lane highway. Things are going to move a lot faster. That information is going to bounce back from left and right hemisphere really quickly versus if your corpus callosum was normal size or average. Makes sense? Beneath the corpus callosum is your lateral ventricle. That's where this probe is sitting. Inside the lateral ventricle, you have choroid plexus, this black stuff right here. That choroid plexus is what secretes the CSF, the cerebral spinal fluid. It doesn't make it. The ependymal cells actually produce the CSF. The choroid plexus secretes it, however, into the lateral ventricles. And let's just tackle that right now. So the CSF will flow from the lateral ventricle. When I say lateral ventricle, I mean first and second ventricle. So when I say it goes from the lateral ventricle to the third, that's not skipping over to the lateral ventricle is the first and the second ventricle. So the lateral ventricle is where the CSF will be produced. The CSF will then flow through the intraventricular foramen, which is about right here, into the third ventricle, which is right here. From the third ventricle, it'll flow through the cerebral aqueduct, this little divot, little indentation right there is the cerebral aqueduct. And from the cerebral aqueduct into the fourth ventricle, it'll flow out through the fourth ventricle into the subarachnoid space. From the subarachnoid space, it'll get reabsorbed through the dural venous sinuses, via the arachnoid villi. Cool. By the way, there's three types of meninges. I keep saying arachnoid. The three types of meninges are dura mater, arachnoid mater, and then pia mater. The arachnoid mater you don't need to know, but it's called arachnoid mater because it looks like a web-like material. It looks like a spider web, basically. All right, so corpus callosum, that's the flow of CSF. Corpus callosum is right here. Beneath the corpus callosum is your fornix. Fornix is part of your limbic system. Limbic system controls your emotional state. Beneath the fornix is your thalamus. It's this right here. Thalamus is, anybody know? Take a guess as to what that is, what it does. I know you guys have heard this before. Exactly, gatekeeper, secretary. It's a relay center for the parietal lobe. All the sensory information in your body will get sent to your thalamus, then from the thalamus it'll get sent to your parietal lobe. Beneath your thalamus would be your hypothalamus, which would sit right about here. Anybody know what that does? All right, maintains homeostasis. There we go. Feel free to talk, guys. All right. Hypothalamus. Beneath the hypothalamus would be your pituitary gland. In the pituitary gland, you won't see in a sagittal cross section because it always gets cut off. Pituitary gland is right here. It's this little bulb. We'll cover that in depth when we get to the endocrine system. The pituitary gland has different functions based on where you're located in the pituitary gland, either the posterior or anterior section of the pituitary gland. The anterior section is the endocrine portion of the pituitary gland, while the posterior section is the has the neurobiological functions. Cool. What's next? Thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary, pineal body, and corporate quadrilemma. So I know you guys have all heard this. Baby buns on a bicycle seat, that's the corpora quadrilemma. Baby buns are the superior colliculi. The bicycle seat would be the inferior colliculi. The superior colliculi deals with functions, deals with vision, and the inferior colliculi deals with hearing. All right. I guess I'll tell you guys this. I told my first row. I was just told this. If you think of it like this, superior deals with vision. Your eyes are in front of your ears. Therefore, the inferior would deal with your hearing because it's inferior. It's behind your eyes, if that helps you remember. Moving from there, we have the pineal body. It's this little bulb right there. The pineal body secretes melatonin, deals with sleep-wake cycles. Mammillary body. This is the mammillary body right here, mammillary bodies. And that's a relay center for olfaction and also deals with spatial memory. Everything on that page. Thank you. I already went over the cerebral aqueduct for the flow of CSF. Beneath the cerebral aqueduct are your cerebral peduncles. They are fiber tracts that connect the pons to the midbrain. This being the midbrain, this being the pons. The cerebral peduncles are fiber tracts that connect the two. All right. The pons is right here, and the medulla is right here. The medulla deals with autonomic functions like heart rate, respiration, things you don't have to think about. That's what autonomic function means. Blood pressure, heartbeat, things like that. What else do I have to go over? Cerebellum pons. The pons are motor tracts for sensory neurons. You always have sensory information coming into the brain. The brain interprets that sensory information and sends out motor information through motor neurons. So if you put your hand on the stove, you'll get a sensory neuron telling your brain, hey, that's hot. Brain will send a motor neuron out and be like, hey, pull your hand back. That's how that works. And then beneath the medulla, you have your brainstem. Right here is the cerebellum, this big thing right here. Cerebellum deals with balance. I think Alciator says place in space. Deals with like if I'm trying to reach for the scalpel, specifically the scalpel and not the probe, that is my cerebellum working. If my cerebellum was impaired by like a lesion, I'd be doing this. All right. Arbor Vitae. Who knows what Arbor Vitae stands for?
Tree of life.
There you go. That sounded really
That
creepy.
sounded so
You have your cortex, which is the gray matter right here, and then your tree of life, the Arbor Vitae, which is your white matter, and this is the cerebellum. Again, that deals with balance and place in space and fine-tuning motor functions. That's what I meant by picking up the scalpel and nothing else. And I think that's it, with the exception of the nerves and then everything else. So, okay, so these are the olfactory bulbs. Optic chiasm. Oh, okay, here we go. So there's the optic nerve, the optic chiasm, and the optic tract. This is the optic nerve going to your eye. The optic chiasm is where those 2 points cross, and the optic tract is behind that optic chiasm. So if this is the everything I just talked about, my fingers would be part of the optic nerve. Where my arms are crossing would be the optic chiasm, and my elbows back here would be the optic tract. I'm pointing that out because if on a test, if this is pinned and you put optic nerve, you're wrong. Okay? What else? Ocular motor. Your ocular motor nerve is this right here. Your trigeminal nerve is this right here, this big stalk thing right here. This is your trigeminal, and you can clearly see the two. There is actually a third right here that kind of got cut off, but that's where the tri comes from. Trigeminal nerve. There's 3 big branches. Very hard to confuse with anything else. And then you have your trochlear, which is this right here coming out of the side, and your abducens, which are very easy to confuse. Where's the abducens? Here's some abducens. So these two right here, these 2 little nerves, those are your abducens, and it comes right out of the pons. Whereas your trochlear comes from around the side, but they're about the same size. Okay? And then, yeah, I think that's, okay. Last thing I wanted to go over are the functional areas of the brain, of your frontal and parietal lobe. So the central sulcus sits right here. I said that already, frontal lobe, parietal lobe. The first gyrus in front of the central sulcus is your primary motor, and the gyrus in front of that is your premotor. Your premotor deals with if you're sitting here thinking about, I really hate this class, I'm just gonna leave. You're thinking about walking to the door. And like let's say you were in an MRI machine, your premotor would be the thing that's lighting up because you're thinking about movement. Your primary motor, once you actually start moving, that's what then is gonna light up. So premotor deals with thinking about voluntary movement. Your primary motor actually deals with that voluntary movement. Behind the central sulcus, the first gyrus would be your primary sensory, and then the gyrus so here's the central sulcus. This first gyrus would be your primary sensory. That receives all the sensory information that your body sends it. Then it sends it to the somatosensory, what's it called? Somatosensory association, and that interprets all that sensory information. So the thalamus, seminars letting out. So again, I said the thalamus would is like a secretary, receives all that sensory information. Will send that sensory information if your hand's on a stove to your primary sensory in the parietal lobe. That primary sensory will then be like, okay, let's send this information to the somatosensory, and the somatosensory will interpret it and be like, oh, that's heat. It's too hot. Remove your hand. Okay, and that's it. Oh, and then the temporal lobe has Wernicke's area, which is right here, and Broca's area. They deal with hearing and learning and things like that. Cool? Cool, cool, cool.